people in welding have embraced me, and I'm just so lucky, I think, to say, I know I'm nuts. I know I wear like not the traditional, I don't look the part. So I've been so super amazed at how everybody's like, okay, we'll kind of give you a forum for whatever this crazy you're talking. Discover your path to leadership excellence at the FMA annual meeting, February 25th to the 27th in Chandler, Arizona. This premier event offers a unique opportunity to connect with prominent figures in the fabrication and metals industries, enabling the exchange of ideas, collaborative solutions to business challenges, and the cultivation of strategic relationships. Visit fmamfg.org for all the details.
Hello, I'm Dan Davis from the Fabricator magazine. You are now listening and watching the Fabricator Podcast. My co-host for today is Josh Welton.
Hello,
Josh.
Hi, Dan.
We're here at FabTech 2024 in Orlando, Florida. There's a lot of noise going on, and it is exciting here.
The atmosphere is incredible.
I was told to acknowledge we were here, so that's a good acknowledgement. So we're about to have a conversation with Demi Knight Clark, who is a big proponent of opening up the world of welding and manufacturing to people of all sorts, backgrounds, genders.
It needs to be inclusive, and she's right on about that.
If you want to see what everything she's involved with, just go to her LinkedIn page or her new website.
Yeah, no, LinkedIn sounds like it'd be good for now because the website's just starting. But
Right.
Yeah, it's just launched.
Our friend Emily Wilkins.
Yeah.
Is
Friend of the
working
pod.
on
I'll
it.
let you talk. I'm done.
He's done.
I'm not making any sense.
But you did make sense in the conversation with Demi, so let's jump to that.
For over 3 decades, Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs has been empowering the next generation. Through youth manufacturing camps, inclusion initiatives, and student scholarships, NBT has inspired young minds to embrace the limitless possibilities of modern manufacturing. As this dynamic industry continues to evolve, so does NBT. Something big is coming, and we can't wait to share it with you.
I don't want to say what you're affiliated with, because it seems like you're kind of like got your...
Everywhere.
Yes, so I'll let you...
all encompassing in welding right now.
So your Instagram page, one of the words is STEMinist.
Yes,
I am
welding
all for
STEMinist.
inventing words, being that I have such difficulty with the English language. So anybody
He invents words all the time on
I
accident.
love it. Yeah. Well, you'll
I'm
love.
sure it's on purpose though.
You'll love the book that I have coming out first of the year, which is From Fearless to Unf-withable. And so me and Emily with Marketing Metal, who's helping with website and all the things, she's like, we just need to get to Merriam-Webster and like put unf-withable and unf-withability. Try that one on for size on the regular. So yes, I am a STEMinist, workforce development advocate. My company is Spark Building Group, but you'll find me now on DemiKnightClark.com. And we've got 3 or 4 different programs that are launching thanks to, after 2 years of really immersing in this industry, doing the research, seeing what deltas to solve, which is basically where you're gonna find me, is where there's no women or where there are really huge challenges, like we need 400,000 welders by 2028, and everybody's just head scratching and saying like, I don't know, it's been that way for years. Well, why don't we moneyball this and do something about it? That's usually where I am. So a couple of programs coming up between Rosie's Reimagined, which is for kids, and that is not a nonprofit. I love nonprofits, but basically it's there to say we need to put workforce development hats into kids, 12 to 16. That is an extension of our workforce development arm of the pipeline. And then also partnership with Nate Bowman, who's weld scientist, also been on the show for our 5-day weld science lab that we're beta testing right now with a couple of companies. And just getting out there and speaking and advocating and being super different where welding is not.
Yeah. What is your background with welding? Can you kind of tell the people this passion, how did it happen?
It's a crazy story. I'm one of the rare thread-throughs that I had a Rosie as a grandmother growing up, and I didn't realize how rare that was until I got into my career days of saying, like, I had this nutty Spitfire redhead. She was not out of a bottle, mine is, but I always knew I was going to be a redhead at some point because of my grandmother, who was a Knight, and that's why we have Knight in our name. All the firstborn girls have Knight in their name, just because she couldn't have junior or senior as men in the 1940s. That's how she did it. She passed it on to all the girls. But she was the one that marched right up in 1943 to the Marine Corps recruiting station in a train station and said, hey, 1, do you take women? 2, do I have to wear a skirt? If it's yes to number 1, no to number 2, I'm in. And the story was made where she went to Marine Corps Air Station in Cherry Point. We think she was trained by Lincoln Electric. We're still going down the historian archives in Euclid, Ohio on that. But she was the one that was the riveter, the grinder, all the things, and then constantly bugged. They said she was a pain in the ass at the time, but had the moxie to bug all the Corsair navigators. She worked on Corsair fighter jets, and she was just constantly saying, like, what is fusion? I don't understand this. I don't understand that. So in a time when women weren't necessarily taught to have that level of curiosity, she was constantly quizzing. And so I got to grow up with that. P.S. They all nominated her because she was a pain in the ass. They were like, please make her a navigator and just have her bug the pilots, because we're just like tired of it. So yeah, she became one of the first female navigators in the U.S. Marines. So it's really cool, because now I get to full circle that of, we just nominated her for Rosie the Riveter Trust out in California, the national park. She is honored there with a banner that's going to be a permanent exhibit. So it's a really long story to say, I've been in the trades for 25 years. I was in more of the home building side, from everything from throwing the hammer to being in high leadership. I jumped out. I went to Yale because I thought, hey, I had to sit in the seat while I was raising 2 kids with my husband. I had to be on the job for women because it was all about see it, be seen. And then I was like, I have to go to the pinnacle place to get that pinnacle, next level, so that everybody takes me seriously. I got out, I started a nonprofit, and then I also was like, I need to weld. So this was 5 years ago. And do you want me to stop there? Yeah. Because this goes into the, like, how did you meet Nate? And how are you all business partners?
How did you meet Nate?
There you go. All right, I'm like the worst podcast person because I'll just keep talking.
Josh is such a natural.
I'll keep talking. Yeah,
I know how to
Josh,
take you.
You were born for this job.
I know, right?
Born for it.
This is a good thing.
So this is a partial sponsorship story, because I get asked all the time by men. I really want men to take that journey of, what do you need to do? If we're 3% or 5% to an industry, a needle that really hasn't moved for welding for 20 plus years, it's a statement of fact. Let's unpack it, rather than be like, I get that all the time of, I'm not trying to not hire women. I know you're not. Like, take your shoulders away from your ears. That's okay. Now let's talk about, what are we doing? 1, go to where the women are, and 9 times out of 10, that's not the places we've been recruiting. Put it more in a place where they are, or underrepresented populations. And then 2, make it a hospitable environment. We were talking about that earlier, of PPE. Are there other women? Do they have to be first? Because the pressure on women is unreal, myself included. When I was in my welding classes, I was like, I gotta be the best. And how many times do we go and interview women who are welders? I saw a couple on Instagram the other day where it's like, yeah, the first week I've got to be just perfect when I hit the job site, and then I got to prove to the guys that I belong here. It is 2024. I don't want my 18 and 20-year-old daughters having to keep proving that they need to be on a job site and have the pressure of burning out because they have to be cleaner, faster, stronger, better. Right. I spent my whole career doing that. So when I met Nate, he is the most amazing advocate and doesn't know it. He's just walking around as a sponsor, and I tell him all the time, I'm like, you are the pinnacle sponsor of anybody in any industry. Because when I tried to get into welding 5 years ago, I just did my research. This is my college kid hat of saying, who's who in this industry, and how can I get the fastest? I'm not 18, I'm 42, from point A to point B. I want to be a TIG welder. What do I do? And I started emailing people. And I just followed people on Instagram, and Nate was the only one that emailed me back. And he said, go buy the Orange Book. If anybody doesn't know the Orange Book, it's the CWS manual, productivity standards. It's that huge Bible. Read it and come back to me. I read it in 3 weeks. I got my AWS membership and read it cover to cover. Super barn burner, right? I mean, it's just like, it's right after Lord of the Rings in my book.
Were there pictures in it?
There were pictures.
Okay, cool.
Travel angle, travel speed will keep you up at night.
Don't spoil the ending.
And I called him back, and he was like, nobody's ever done what I've asked them to do, and so now I'm going to teach you to weld. He taught me to weld, and then the relationship was born in terms of sponsorship and allyship and just being such a great teacher, mentor, now collaborator, that's all I tell guys. It's like, if you're trying to be a sponsor of any underrepresented population, I can represent women, is to just get out there and he's constantly on the ready for me, where it's like, what crazy idea do you have?
Nate doesn't get enough attention
no, he doesn't.
for who he is in the industry.
Yeah, and again, like, I fangirl because he just doesn't know how, and maybe that's it. Maybe that's part of the magic is don't try so hard, right?
Yeah.
For the guys who are watching, listening, don't try so hard. Just go sit in the room of all of those women or people that you want to say, like, I need to hear their voice, and just sit there. Don't say a word. And then ask, what do you feel like you need from me? What do you need from me? And he's always been that. Mark Fisher is another at Lincoln Electric for me, and really the whole Lincoln team. I definitely #WeldRed, not to be an advertisement, but it's more because they just say, we don't necessarily understand this crazy idea that you're going into, but it's like that Serena Williams quote of, people call you crazy, show them what crazy can do. And that's what a sponsor does, is say, like, I may not understand this, but let me feed into it. How can I help you?
Right.
Right on.
Yeah. Have you run across that in terms of working with people of the opposite sex during your career? Has that been a rare occurrence?
Oh, it has. At Chrysler, there was a few skilled tradeswomen. At General Dynamics, we have a few that have hired in. But like, when it's 2 women and 103 guys or something, like, I try my best just to. I'm not like pushy. I'm not trying to like be an umbrella or anything. But you just try your best in your everyday life to make sure, at least when you're interacting with them, you're interacting as another person and not either condescending or patronizing. Just like, cool, you're just here, you're one of the folks working.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was 18 and I first stepped foot in a factory, and during summer, my dad worked there full time, so during the summer they would have kids that were going to college. They were able to come in and work and make money. You could make as much money as the full-time people. And men would get their daughters into that factory, and I was like, I would never let a daughter of mine in this factory because of the things I saw. And that's another thing is we want to change everyone's minds and everyone's actions overnight. And we're now in a good place in this process where it's starting to happen. But you talk to a 75-year-old guy, he's not going to change his mind or his opinion on anything.
Right.
So it's like I might have a discussion with them, but there's not going to be an argument because there's no point to it. It's this younger generations that's coming up with more women in the field, and it's just sort of occurring naturally. Clearly not as quickly as we'd like, but it's a process. It's a hard thing to do because they're constantly compared. Their best effort or their worst effort is always compared to somebody else's best effort.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and imagine, you said something really poignant there of not just a 75-year-old, but I think that is something to honor here, is how they came up in the trades, but then the 2 of 100, right? So my advocacy piece of me is working with a lot of men right now, because if I'm 3% of an industry, I have to work with whoever the 97% is to say, okay, let's unpack. Tell me more about what you don't understand. And so that's what I'm always trying to say is, I'm not going to judge anybody off of a statement of fact of how things are. But if it's 2 of 100, I just want to really have people stop and think about that. I don't care. This is gender agnostic, women, men, non-binary, is to say, imagine the pressure. Because I've been in that seat. I've been in that seat in welding classes, in my career, all growing up, being 47 and 25 years of this. And then Title IX in sports. I'm a feral Gen Xer, so I loved being around the guys and the boys and all that, but I see that in my 18 and 20-year-old daughters. They have a lot more gender parity in their classes, but there's still kind of this bro culture and all the things that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are really saying. It's just, flip the script. If 2 out of 100 at your company were men,
it'd be weird.
You would be like, oh, the pressure's on, right? Again, my whole career was I would get in my truck and be like, today you're going to be cleaner, faster, stronger, better. I cannot divorce myself of that phrase. I think it pushed me. And again, I had amazing male bosses, mentors. That was the 97%. So I had to feed into saying, like, what do I do? You're the person in the room that's going to help me do this. So unpack this for me. Right, wrong, or indifferent. But if you have to flip it and there's only 2 of 100, my biggest piece is let's get one of many. Hemet High School, Alessandra High School, Josh O'Neill, amazing guy. We were able to go with Nate. They were filming a Weld Science episode last year. I got to go with Women at Work. Dovetail had sponsored it. We were doing a sign. There were 6 women out of a class of 12. Can I tell you how different that environment was? It was the coolest thing to walk into that class, and there was no mention. There was no need to be like, oh, there's the 2 girls in the room,
right,
or the 1 girl in the class, and she's like this unicorn in the corner. There was just work being done. And I think that's why I'm getting goosebumps thinking about all those pictures, because it was so cool to see when there are one of many.
Yeah.
And that's, again, take it out of the gender piece, any kind of underrepresentation in your company. And then the recruiting problem isn't a recruiting problem anymore.
Right.
Because they're talking to their friends, or it's being seen. So I think just being able to unpack from that place of saying, hey, let's look at our company.
Yeah.
Statement of fact, no one is being finger pointed at if it's 2 of 100 of something.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at it from a business angle of, if it could be one of many, 1, where do we go where those people are? Stop going to the same places.
Right.
2, make it a hospitable environment, whether that's PPE, whether that's not having the bro culture, being able to kind of train
Others
people
having
through
clean
that.
bathrooms.
Yeah, bathrooms,
Yeah.
shower facilities that are
Locker
separate.
rooms.
I mean, there's such basics that we're still not seeing on job sites. I mean, I'll say it with just gloves. We were talking about PPE. It's how are we still in 2024 fighting for PPE?
Yep.
And that's anyone small.
Yeah.
There's small guys out there. I can't weld with gloves that aren't straight on. You know?
I started welding with small TIG gloves just because I like how tight they are, so you can pick up whatever you want to pick up and not worry about it. But that's another part of it, is like I'll wear anything from a small to an extra large depending
Yeah.
on the situation.
Right.
And that's not always available. Plus the cuts can be different, and it is cool just since we've been doing this with FMA and coming to these events, is that people are taking the initiative to fix that. But Lincoln has been one of the kind of on the front line of doing some of that stuff, especially with before Jesse Combs passed away, and then it's kind of
Right.
gone on from there. But we need to see more of that. I know Miller's got a few gloves now, and different helmets or whatever, but not everyone's the same. You've got to have a variety of stuff, and it can't just be one company doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's a more global issue when you start thinking about
Yes.
this is bigger construction, is hard hats. I mean, we could talk about welding hoods too, but hard hats, it's not just women's hair, it's locks and braids and
Right.
ethnic hair, which is not my frame of reference, but I know ponytails.
Right.
So it's like, this isn't just women that we're talking about. Like, we should just do this for humanity and recruiting.
Right.
Like, just do better, right? So, but it's funny because I will say that PPE seems to be a safe place to stay, to talk about, because it's like, well, that's the challenge. It's a bigger challenge that I think comes back to that, how do we get to one of many? Rather than the like, she was the first woman in our class, or
Yep.
Simone Biles said it. She's like, I don't want to be a first, I want to be a goat. So
Yeah.
I need goats in your classroom. And if you got 6 goats out of 12, the pressure's off them. They can have fun.
Yes.
They can fail forward and break stuff for you, in all things welding. And then they can go have really long careers.
It was-
But I was, not to minimize your point of view, but I think it's an industry issue just in terms of getting people into the industry.
Yeah,
And
million
we've made it.
percent.
We were having like PPE. How many places actually buy PPE for their
Right.
employees? And when it comes to people complaining about not being able to find employees, there are companies out there that don't have a problem. And
Yes.
it's a combination of work environment. It's a combination of compensation, and they have it. They figured it out. And what you're pushing for is, not only, I think it's gotten to the point where people will open the doors, that support structure you're talking about, especially Gen Z, they like to be engaged. They don't want to be left alone. They like, for lack of a better word, to be coached, They're hungry to learn, but they don't want to be left out on an island. And the mental image I have is like one female amongst a crew of guys. It's their idea of like letting her be is let her be. You know what I mean? And I'm not so sure that's an environment that's
It's a really cold environment.
yeah. And how does that change? I honestly see more. I'm more bullish with the younger generation, younger
I'm seeing
people
it
than
more
having
like that,
older
too.
people trying to change their ways. Because frankly, I don't know if they really believe it. I think they
younger
kind of they talk about it because it's. I mean, you've had these conversations with these guys. They're not willing to state in front of their leader. What kind of leader is not transparent enough to show vulnerability?
Yeah,
And
it's
I
hard.
get it. I get it on Wall Street. There's all that, but I'm talking about companies with like 40 people. It's not like it's a voting block or a shareholder meeting.
Right.
It's a lot more intimate of a relationship you need to have in small to medium sized business. So I think there are people out there that get it, but man, I run into a lot of people where it's still I feel this whole like my way or the highway type of approach, and it's.
Well, I think it's a good segue because my platform isn't to get, I want to see more women in the industry, but that's been my whole life, is to say, I'm going to go where the least amount of women are, because one, it's a comfort zone, because I was always one of the guys growing up as a feral Gen Xer. I had an older brother. I was thrown into the workshop with my sapper Army Ranger dad, and then I had my grandmother. These like having more masculine kind of tendencies, and I was very comfortable with that. So now it's to say, I have 18 and 20-year-old daughters. Why are they in the same kind of challenge set? It's more I look at it from a global, two things. One, this industry has got to have that kind of diversity to just stay alive and stay challenging, because you need more thought leadership in the room to challenge some of the stuff as we have all this technology coming. So maybe not stay in our silos of what we think we know, but then also the challenge of this next generation, and I'm really entrenched in Gen Z and Gen Alpha right now. It's all kids. They're much more gender fluid. I could put my 18 and 20-year-old daughters in here and they're like, Mom, the soapboxing. Like, we don't need the Title IX stuff anymore. And I'm like, okay, good. At least there we've made some real traction. Yeah. They're used to being 50-50 in most of their classrooms, even in engineering classes and things that we might think are not. But there are still challenges like what we just talked about, of saying, getting into some of these industries that are really having a recruiting problem. We can start with the gender, or we can say, hey, let's make it a global thing of what else are we facing. And I think that's where the bigger place that this feeds into, gender does feed into needing 400,000 welders by 2028, but it's just one element of many in recruiting. So It's kind of like, if that's a safer place to start for some of my male counterparts and CEOs and friends, I want to start there. If that's okay with you, that's fine. Let's start there, because let's start with the recruiting problem, and gender will be part of that, and maybe it's a little more organic of a conversation.
Yeah, personally, I don't believe that we need, we have like 400,000 welders right now. There's no way we need 400,000 more, and I have issue with those numbers. I know they're the ones that like the AWS puts out, but we need just to let kids go where they want to go. Like, that's why middle school, junior high works, because they get it acclimated to it, they witness it and experience it, and maybe all of a sudden they're like, oh crap, I don't want to do welding, I want to be a doctor. Or on the other hand, I don't want to go to law school, I want to be a welder.
Yeah.
And they can make those decisions with data, and then you're getting the best and the brightest where they want to be. So you're going to get a smarter welding community, you're going to get a happier white collar community, and
education should be part of, or trades education should be part of education
for
everybody,
from being like a super young kid all the way up. And maybe that, because how it is now, you get to high school and they're like, you don't read so good, go to sheet metal class. And instead you could have somebody who struggles with it when they're in junior high and be like, this is not my thing, I got to work really hard to do something else to go to school. But overall, we just need a better workforce.
Yeah.
And that's out there. They're out there.
We need more well-rounded people.
A happier workforce, more rounded
good
people.
humans.
Yeah, that's
I
exactly
take good
it.
humans.
To me, the ideal, education at a certain point is not about training. It's about development of being able to learn, being able to communicate, being able to critically think. And the part that led up to where we are now is the dissolution of welding wood shop in junior highs.
Oh, yeah.
My parents, they did all that. I heard about it. What's the negative point of having somebody do that as opposed to like art elective or welding, and maybe even combining the two?
The timeline of the eradication in urban areas of CTE is very like right in front of our faces. When people are like, how are the trades dead? One, they're not dead, to your point. Absolutely not dead. So I love it when people come at me with that. But then also, like, here's the deal. I was one of the last vocational technology classes. I love the drill press.
No kidding.
This was like 1989. I'm ancient to the Gen Zers, right? The 1900s kids.
Right.
Feral Gen Xers again. But then as I got into high school and I tried to go that same route, this is where, and I don't want to really just crush high school guidance counselors, but I think that's the crux of everything. I watched my own 2 daughters go through it, and some of their friends who ended up choosing the trades and apprenticeships and still getting ostracized for having an associate's degree in electrical engineering at the end of this. But because you didn't choose traditional college route, it is what it is. That's a whole nother hour to unpack. But really, that's part of my deal, is to get to high school guidance counsel and say, hey, which governors are saying we are rewarding these trade apprenticeships the same monetizable way in our school districts as we are those rates of going to college, which that pendulum is a big swing in many of the urban states versus ag cultures that are much more apt to have those mega CTEs, which are amazing right now. So I think the balance point can come with a lot of advocacy, a big piece of where I live, but then also what we were kind of unpacking and the varsity welding shirts that I gave you all earlier is these kids that are still told 30 years later, just like I was, of like, ooh, the auto shop and the welding kids are like, that's not you. You're on a college track, so let's keep you over here. Just all of the like horrible, you were saying tropes, like just, we really categorized in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but so I'm like, oh, this is the 2020s. You know, we're just so enriched now. No, these kids are getting the same narratives told to them of less than.
That's been a big thing with Nate and me over the last few years is the memes that talk about, I don't need to go to school. I'm going to become a welder, and it's a little kid saying the F word to his teacher or something, or just the things that the middle-aged, you know, the guys in the industry would put out there and think is hilarious. And it's like, I see some humor in that, but at the same time, you're putting out the wrong message. Like, you guys are way smarter than you're letting on.
Yeah, it's putting it in the universe, and I'm a really big, positive affirmation person. I'm constantly putting crazy stuff on the vision board.
You talk about manifesting things.
Yeah, you do manifest. And honestly, like words, because originally, since I was told by a high school guidance counselor, I would have chosen trades just like my grandmother. I honestly would if I had to dial back the clock, especially knowing what I know now. Who cares about the stigmas? Like, you do you, and that's how I've tried to raise my daughters and tell their friends as well. But I was told, like, well, you know, you're such a good writer. You should be a journalist. You should be Katie Couric at the time. And I was like, okay. Went into that internship, hated it. And I still got that traditional job until the dot-com boom busted. And I was like, what's the most stable industry I can get a job in 2003? Construction. So I went the construction route, loved it, and was in all these populations of people, from throwing the hammer to being in high leadership.
It's still construction. It's always construction.
It always is, and it was stable, but it also was just this open world of being able to solve for things. And it took me 30 years to come back and do welding. Now, I don't want that 16-year-old right now being influenced by whatever, stigmas by parents of like, I got to say that my kid's going to college, God forbid. I tell my friends, or the socials, whatever. And then also them just feeling this pressure from high school to say like, well, you're so good at the textbooks. They may absolutely hate the textbooks, but that's going to crush it when they get into that welding shop and they start solving things with fusion and breaking open the science like Nate teaches. That is STEM. And so that's a big part of my life, is saying welding is STEM, and these kids are literally going to put rockets on the moon. They're doing it right now with welding. How have we taken technology out and STEM out of the welding narrative? And I think it's because for so long, and we still are, telling these kids that they're less than. And that's where varsity welding started. They are the varsity squad. I want every single one of them in those schools to be given that t-shirt and said, you chose the best route because you're badass and you're going to be amazing your whole life.
And that's one of the things that's changed. It's always kind of cyclical, but shop classes are coming back, and a lot of it was just very simply like Monster Garage. Kids wanted to be cool like Jesse James, so they would get into that welding. And now those people are starting their own shops and doing their own thing. And just the fact that then all those shows came on Discovery, which are pretty much garbage, but they kept it in people's limelight, or kept it in people's minds. And you had more people asking about how can I get into this. So there's that media aspect of it too. Like, we got to show them that this is something that it seems like it's now more admired than it ever has been.
Huge part of my life right now, because I do still feel like, I don't want to say the word outsider because that's a strong choice of words. People in welding have embraced me, and I'm just so lucky, I think, to say, I know I'm nuts. I know I wear like not the traditional, I don't look the part, whatever the part is. And I know we were unpacking that of like, maybe there's lots of parts.
There are.
Maybe we should embrace
definitely.
everything. So I've been so super amazed at how everybody's like, okay, we'll kind of give you a forum for whatever this crazy you're talking. But we have got to get it out. And they were talking about this yesterday on a panel for workforce development here at the show of, you've got to make this sexier. I don't really use that term anymore, but it's more of saying, look at where welding isn't, but where the kids are.
Right.
I don't do the TikTok thing because I feel like from a professional standpoint, I want to elevate it to say, this is one of the things on my vision board, so maybe I'm manifesting it on your podcast. I want to weld with the NFL. I literally want Taylor Swift with a torch in her hand because of the exposure that's going to get to audiences that are not looking at welding. I do a rate the welds all the time where I'm going through stadiums, and everybody does rate the welds. We all can't unsee welds, especially bad welds, right?
Truth.
But I tell people all the time in my non-welding life is you're walking through an average of 700 structures a day that are welded either over, through, or under them. Do you care about structural integrity? Do you understand fusion and the science behind welding? Because that's what Nate taught me. And people are curious about it. So I'm trying to bring in people that are in my camps that have never picked up a torch in their life.
Yeah.
Nate and I did the very first discovery session ever at TED Women last year in the fall. We had no idea how this would land. It was CEO Women, had spent, a very expensive ticket to get to TED Women. It's a very prestigious set of events. And we were like, they have no frame of reference to this. Maybe that was prejudging on our side, but we were like, is this going to flop? It was the first one to sell out of all their discovery sessions. All 50, there were only 50 spaces. These 50 women were like winning with the torch. The cape comes out the back of them that, you could just see that their shoulders were more strong, and all of them were saying, I want to go home to Iowa or California or wherever. How do I do this? And so Nate and I kind of looked at each other and were like, boy, we need a call to action. We never knew that they would care. And that was our own prejudgment, not being in welding. But then also, now what? So what, now what? And so now we've got more of the calls to action to say, there is a makerspace in every town in America. So if you don't want to be a welder by trade and do the apprenticeship and take on the career, go to the makerspace. Take your kids if you have kids, or take your friends if you don't have kids. Learn to weld. Just hobbyist it, and then you can talk about it to someone else. And I think that really turned on the light bulb for me to say, go places where welding is not. And then the second piece of this is there's somebody that's doing it. Blue Forge Alliance is walking around in here. They've got buildsubmarines.com, and that is probably the sexiest thing out there right now, and it is getting kids in droves. They're putting it in places that I still think are a little masculine, like we need you getting to Chapel Rowan concerts and, things where, again, go to where more girls are. NASCAR and NFL have increasing populations, but still, I think you could expand that, and you've got the money to do it. But in terms of having a diverse campaign that looks like really badass, why would you not want to go throw sparks or do TIG or, build submarines? I mean, it is an amazing campaign. So just take a page from that. Make your flyers cool. Don't have this 1970s looking flyer for manufacturing. It's really basic to me, but I think people are still kind of like, wait, but we've done it this way. Why isn't it working?
Well,
change.
Yeah. That's so many people are stuck in their ways. Like there was, sat next to a couple of guys at lunch, at lunch yesterday. And the first thing they said, because we're all about, my Darla and I are all about getting younger people noticed. So we do a podcast where it's 35 and under, and it's people who don't have a big following that nobody's really maybe heard of yet, but they're doing awesome things in the industry. And so the first thing these guys say, we asked if we could sit down, and they said something about getting kids involved, and they're like, good luck with that. And then the whole lunch was them talking about how they've tried everything and nobody shows up for work and nobody wants a job and nobody wants to work. And at the same time, they're like, yeah, we train them on this stuff, and then they leave for more money. It's like, well, duh. like, yeah, that's what they're going to do. You're clearly not doing everything you can because you're not paying enough. And, like, it's just they want to keep doing things the way labor is always like a fixed cost. They don't want to pay more. And the shops then, after that, we talked to another guy, and he's like, yeah, I had this young, I'm not sure what his job was, but basically he was like a problem solver. And every day he wanders in late, and he does great work. And at night, I'm getting replies from him at like 1 a.m, but he just can't come in at the same time every day. So I found him. I'm like, hey, man, what's your deal? Like, how can we work with each other? And he's like, I just don't want to come in the morning. He's like, okay, cool. Like, he gets more done now than he did before because, you know, the guy's got a family, so he's home with his family, but he's also on call all the time. And then at night, when the family goes to bed, he's taking care of business. And that's like a new way of thinking about it. But yeah, so many people are just like, we've been doing this for so long, it's always worked. Well, it's not now, so change it up.
And they do.
Seems so simple.
Like those shops have split shifts.
Yeah.
Where like you can be home for your kids in the morning, but come in and maybe work during the day.
Especially
then work a little bit later. The Friday, Saturday, Sunday, not most ideal, but if you got like another working parent, it's a great way to make sure.
Gen Zs love that. They love the 20 hour. A lot of them like the third shift because then they can do their side. I mean, if y'all aren't getting used to saying side gig, get used to it.
Right.
Look at, somebody said that yesterday.
And 13 hours done.
40-hour work week. Just try to put a different lens on it. If it explodes your brain to say, no, I have to have a 40-hour work week in my shop, then try to unpack that with, if you're trying to hire more Gen Z that's going to stay with you for a career trajectory versus the 1 year, 6 months. I hear that about turnover all the time. Like, Gen Z just doesn't want to stay. Well, what are you doing to make them want to stay is what I want to unpack. So I try to turn it on its ear. Like, I'll honor what you're saying. I hear the good luck with that all the time. Nate knows this about me. It's why we collaborate a lot, because I think we are similar in thought, belief on this, of saying, just challenge me. I'm now going to prove to you that, yes, good luck with that. Don't need it. I've already got the metrics, the science, the people behind it, and now I'm going to make it successful. So say that all day, you're going to die out over time. And so I used to take that really personally earlier in my career, saying like, no, I need to change that mindset. But kind of to what you were saying, Josh, earlier is, you can think that way. I'm just going to work over here, and these are my people, because they're thinking differently. They want to change things. They're staying in a positive mindset about it to say like, gosh, this sucks right now, but I'm open to hearing what other ideas are there, or failing forward in some of the things that might be a solution to get to the next level. But that's how progress is made.
Yes.
That's how progress and efficiency and productivity. So put your machinist hat on or your manufacturing hat on, and it's the same thing with people. So when we have that, good luck with that mentality. I think one part is fear, right? To be like, wait, the industry's changing. Am I part of this? Am I ready for this? Or do I need to retire? You got to unpack that. I'm sorry, you do. That's with you. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
But then also to just try to change the lens and say like, all right, I'm going to shut up for a minute and say, tell me more. What do you mean when you say that, right?
Yeah, when you were talking earlier about needing the people in power to have open minds, some of that is like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, you need the people in those positions, but to have minorities and women in those positions, you've got to go through the long haul of making it to that position that you can take. And I think it's kind of, there's a little bit of both, but that's another way. That's another place where you really need advocates, because that's not an overnight solution. Waiting like, okay, I'm on the shop floor, I'm 21, I really want to make changes around here. I got to wait till I'm 40 or 45 for that position to open up. And I think that's always the struggle, is getting open-minded people in those positions that make the choices and are willing to make choices that not everyone else would make.
Yeah, well, and great point there on, again, if I do nothing else on this podcast, men who might be listening or watching, I want you to start thinking, I don't know what I don't know, and that's okay. If you're trying to have more diverse recruiting, or you're trying to get out there and just have a different solution, then unpack that and say you don't know what you don't know. I work with men all the time that are in those positions, and the ones that really want change to happen are not threatened by having those populations coming into the room. It's the build the bigger table, all the things that you hear. I think those get a little overused at times. It is building the bigger table, but then it's once they're in the room, let them speak, stop speaking. You're going to learn a lot. But then also, how are you sponsoring to that point them taking your job at some point? Because you want to move on to something else, not because you're like, I'm the CEO and I'm rooted. You need time too. And you want this predecessor to, my next people aspirationally coming in and solving things differently. So really sit in the room and say, is it something where I'm a bit fearful of what could come? Is that going to threaten what I have in my place? The ones that are making change happen, that is not the case, but they still don't have that navigation set of tools in the toolkit to say, wait, can I be vulnerable? This might be ironic to the women in the population here, and I do this in my speaking world, as I say, I have to create safe spaces for men in welding all the time. And that's okay, because if I can't create a space for men who are in leadership in this industry to be able to unpack authentically and with vulnerability, I don't know what I don't know about recruiting, about having more hospitable environments, or just understanding where our industry's going and how should I be thinking about that with change agency and putting my P&L in different places. If we can't have that authentic space, those people have been hired for a high salary, or they've gotten themselves into these president CEO positions because they know what they're doing. And that's why they make what they make. So for them to have to admit, I don't know what I don't know, I can understand that is a place of saying, I'm not allowed to say that. So I just want them to be okay with saying, even if it's just LinkedIn me, and we'll have a private conversation, we're not trying to get you all in a room and talk about it, but go there and say, what do I not know? And find those places and then sponsor the people that you want to see in the room.
They're afraid of saying, I don't know what I don't know, because they still want their $30 million bonus, and they're afraid that that's going to get he doesn't know everything? Oh, well, he doesn't deserve that huge bonus.
Or even to what you were saying earlier, if it's a small to mid-sized shop and it's a family-run business, dad or grandpa, whoever is running it, 20 to 40 people there, same situation. Whether they're getting a $30 million bonus or not, they're still saying, I just don't know what I don't know. So how am I supposed to walk around my 40 employees and say, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you tell me about this recruiting thing?
So
no,
we see a
it's
lot
horrible
of shops,
to say that, right?
We see a lot of shops who are willing and have the time to engage their local community college, high school, hopefully even middle school, junior high, whatever it may be.
Varsity.
What should they do going beyond just reaching out to maybe the trades program to go where these other, where these people are? Would you have a recommendation? The thing that popped in my head as we're having this discussion is there was a while back where the Boy Scouts were offering a welding merit badge. I'm as we're having this conversation, I wonder why the Girl Scouts never
Oh, don't get me started on that. Yeah, it's only with the Boy Scouts. Girl Scouts does not. I have gone down this road as well. Also, Lego, if you're listening, you need to bring back the welding hood for Legos, and then also have a girl head for it.
1,000%.
But to answer your question, Dan, it's a great question of where should I go? Yeah, it's easy to tell people go where the women are or go where the underrepresented populations are. My initial thought is, and this is kitschy, but go to the Taylor Swift concert, go to Chapel Rowan. That's very lexicon of today's 18-year-old, and she's in the media, but she's also a very watch me girl. Just watch Taylor Swift and look at the echelon of her career and how she's moved. She's always gone into places and said, I'm going to define this. So there is a generation of men and women following what she does, saying okay, she's a pretty good businesswoman.
She would be the biggest influencer ever in any industry.
So again, that's where, I'm manifesting this. She will have a torch in her hand at some point. And what that would do for all genders. But really, if there's a smaller starting point than getting to Taylor Swift, it's basically saying, what other workforce development agencies or schools? I'm big in STEM programs. I'm trying to make that connection of, listen, in these urban areas, CTE is a heavy lift. Right. It was eradicated in 2000. So what can we do to put welding back in and literally # welding is STEM? Why are we having to tell people that? It is science, math, and technology. But partner with your STEM after schools. Make 48 is another great one. They are doing these challenges where they're putting maker spaces back in with STEM challenges. And it's this is a brilliant piece to put it together. And by the way, you're getting to this Gen Z that's listening, of being able to talk, okay, maybe handheld lasers, which are all over the show, and cobots and robots, scare some of the population here. And we're always going to need hand welding. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Right. But to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, you start with that with them and how that's an intro to welding because all they've ever had is a phone, that's going to break them in.
Yeah.
And that's going to expose them to ask more questions. So I think start there. Start with STEM and then say, how can I partner in? Or start with the workforce development agencies. Like Nate and I have a beta class that's a 5-day weld science lab with Goodwill. Goodwill is effectively an amazing staffing agency of people that are 18 to 48 saying, I want a different career, or I need a better opportunity for myself. Go to places like that have a much more diverse population, or let's just say a supplemented, because CTE schools and our technical colleges and state colleges are amazing, but that same level of diversity is in other places that you can expand your knowledge base. So I would start there, and chambers.
And Nate was talking about the one lady who took the class who had a family, like raising kids, working, going to school, and then doing that class with Goodwill. It was incredible.
We didn't know how she put all the hours together. And that was
don't.
really the profile of all 12 of our August participants. One was literally doing a third shift, then going in and moving because he had to move apartments due to some funding and finances. He had lost his job. They were all so motivated. It was like, I need to take a weld test on Monday after we finished up at 11 o'clock on Friday, because they were all taking it after their jobs or after being with families. Just insane level of work ethic. And we said that alone, like rubrics be damned, just on work ethic, and then also listening to what we were saying, being able to set up their machines, and then understanding the elements of TIG. They are vetted and hireable. Now go take the on-the-job training with Steel Fab or Nucor or Company X. Yeah.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Meeting people with employers that want to employ them, and putting people in a position where they can be employed by those folks.
And that's no different than any other industry, right? I think we get really chicken or the egg on education right now. I think CTE schools are great. I, again, came in late in life and said, I'm not 18. I don't have 900 hours and 2 years of my time to go be a generalist and learn flux core, stick, TIG, MIG. I want to be dangerous in those, but I started questioning, how do we get efficiency? And then, I've gone down this bunny trail with Lincoln of like, how much time do we actually have booth time as part of those classes versus I'm grinding for 3 hours, and am I going to have that as a career? We're not going down all of that. I think there's a time and a place for those programs, and then all these apprenticeships with the unions, amazing stuff. But for somebody like me that was a career transitioner, how do I go from point A to point Z? I want to be a master TIG welder. I don't have 10 years to do that if I want to go to SpaceX. Yeah. Nate, how do you get me there? And that's what started us down that
I think
welding lab.
Industry where they may be short on some areas, I think that is where they're showing a willingness to kind of create that path. So like, learn this skill, get this pay raise, learn this skill, add this, and it's commensurate with their pay increases.
And the other thing I would say for people,
learn on their dime.
The other thing is, if you have an HR team that you have delegated this to in your shop or in your company, please, Lord, teach them what a weld test is, and it's not always 6G that you're looking for. Like 45-degree orbital pipe. You don't need that when you're doing restaurant fab, thin alloys. They're not even taking a TIG test. You know what I'm saying? But they haven't gone through any of the training. So I'm seeing that disconnect. The more employers that I talk to, me and Nate talk to, of placing some of these people is to say, wait, we just did a 5-day MIG class, but you've known all along, and you're coming in and talking to the class that you need thin alloy TIG, but you're not even understanding how to talk out your test. You don't even understand the differences between the processes. So we were like, whoa, brains exploding. And I'm not calling them out. It just was really eye-opening for us to say, if you're delegating it, we're huge advocates of saying your plant managers are your hiring managers. They're the ones that come in and recruit. They're the ones to tell the day-to-day and what you're truly welding on, what are the skills they really need. And the HR managers, go put them through your school or get them at least functionally able to be dangerous when they're talking to recruits, because if they're just issuing a weld test, they are not your recruiting people. I'm sorry. Come after me on the socials, but you're not.
Some facilities, they feel like warm body, ability to show up, not, drug free. If they're still doing that, I'm not even sure.
Yes.
But that if they have the educational process training on the shop floor, then your HR can be a little disconnected at that point. They got to be. Most cases, they should be on the same page.
Yeah, and again, I'm not pointing fingers on that one. It's just more of a statement of fact to say, wow, that's come up in the research. If that's you, by now. CEOs have to be at a strategic level. I don't want you recruiting. That's not, if I was consulting with your company on efficiency, I'd come in and be like, that's not the best use of your time.
Right.
However, you need to have your subject matter experts intimately involved if you care about your recruiting pipeline and your career trajectories at your shop or your company, to have them hand in hand, or get the training for your recruiting staff if they are a little disconnected from the shop floor. I've talked to a couple of companies here that have their inside sales teams, and I always ask, I'm like, where'd you come from? How'd you get hired? Especially into the laser and the cobots and the robots and automation side over there. I'm just curious, like, what's your profile in a very emerging part of the industry? A lot of it, sports, just doing the thing. And okay, how much time do you spend in the booth? I really haven't had much time to get there. It's kind of like I'm on the road a lot. We need our sales teams in the booth.
100%.
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm calling you out. Get them in the booth. Because I don't know how your subject matter, I don't need you to be a master welder with CWI and CWS and all the things, but you need to have enough functional dangerousness to be able to talk your products, right?
Usually the area managers for sales, at the very least, like speaking of where we are at in Michigan, like Miller will have, different areas, and the guys that run the sales through those areas are all really, really good. But once the farther you go down the line of, from a manager down to a guy who's going to go talk to somebody, some of that's definitely lost.
So I see it as opportunity. Again, like, not to call them out. It's more saying, like, if I start unpacking with companies, what are the challenges? Those are usually the things that will bubble up to the surface.
The thing you're selling, you should be very proficient with.
Well, the same thing for HR, the same thing for your finance teams, the same, like, I was listening to Titan talk on Titans of CNC with the piece up here, and he's like, that is your culture. Like, productivity and efficiency is your culture. It's just looking at it a different way. Like, is your culture caring about what they're welding every day, if that's what their job is, to functionally weld? And then also to question that, like, is this the way, do we think if we went through a brake test, is this going to pass up, if you're not consistently testing things? But then all of your departments, like, is the vision there to say, we're going to go change the world on X, whatever that product is, and it's not just in their silo of saying, I'm recruiting. And that's what I see a lot in the recruiting side, is they've been tasked with it, so it's no harm, no foul on the HR departments, but it's more of saying, okay, get more involved, C-suite, and unpack it. Not you literally going and rolling up your sleeves and recruiting, but putting the functional teams together to get what you want.
Yeah. I see that right now with where I work. We're so desperate for workers, because the pay scale is ridiculous. Like, once you get up to it, it's good, but the 10 years before that are rough. And so overall, everyone's titled a driver mechanic, but under that, you've got specializations like welding or electrical or paint. And when HR gets the resumes, they just see, oh, this person welded. They don't, like, go and look at what they did or the work that they did, or if they welded once or if they've been welding for 10 years. And so we're getting all these people in, these younger folks in, who are like, oh yeah, they get hired as a welder, and then you ask them their welding experience, and they're like, oh yeah, I welded something in my dad's garage one time. And that's not on the person, that's on HR for not, I mean, it is kind of on the person, but for putting that into the resume. But HR's got to vet that stuff. And if they're not talking to people on the floor, there's a huge disconnect. I mean, it's a big company, so there's a huge disconnect between HR and the people on the floor.
I got a question for you. So you'd mentioned earlier, like, what would have happened, like, if you could have gone into, like, maybe learning welding in high school or something like that? Do you think, like, alternative life paths for yourself, like where you would be if maybe you had done that and kind of gotten that skill and entered a manufacturing company? You give off a lot of leadership energy, and, like, I wonder, like, if you ever thought yourself, like, hey, what if I had run my own place? And there's, never say never. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Maybe. But I'm one that tries to stay forward focused. That's why I'm a runner. That's why I'm like the next 26.2 miles. What's next?
Maybe this is the right timing.
Yeah, right. But honestly, it is, rather than look hindsight, which we can all be armchair quarterbacks on that.
Right.
I'm a big proponent of saying it's the mountain range and not the summit. And I've been through quite a mountain range. And could I be doing what I'm doing right now if I hadn't had the trajectory that I did?
Right.
I do say, though, I was talking to the engineers that were former SpaceX guys the other day and saying, like, don't think I wouldn't be, like, hanging off the tower build, welding, doing some crazy TIG stuff and titanium, which, I don't know, like, maybe I'm manifesting that too, like, put me in Starbase, like, now. I do want to weld something that goes into space, which so does Nate.
I want to weld in space.
Have you seen their recruiting posters? NASA's recruiting posters, they're from 2016. This is not new stuff, but that's how forward-thinking NASA is. It's the coolest stuff where it's like night shift on the moon. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying put this in front of a 10-year-old, they're gonna wanna weld. And it's literally someone using what I think they're trying to envision is in space with no oxygen, like what would our gases be using, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But it looks like a welding torch. So it's night shift on the moon and then some assembly required. So cool.
We have a friend we have to introduce to you later about welding in space, if you haven't met her yet.
Is that Amarette?
Yes.
Oh, I know Amarette.
Oh,
yeah.
you do? All right,
She's in
great.
Charlotte.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
find each other in this little small world of
I
crazy.
figured, but
yeah.
I had to say something because
It's a small community.
Yeah,
in
she's
a
still
way.
doing crazy stuff, and
She's
we need
incredible.
1 million of us, right, to be talking about it. Because I'm not saying
Well, she's
every
running
job.
into she's running into walls at NASA because they're not being progressive enough,
Right.
and other space companies. And she's got another one today, and I'm just like crossing my finger that somebody thinks outside of the box with her that can give her the funding to do what she's doing, because that is going to be a huge thing in the future. Collecting, recycling, whatever's up there,
Right.
building, like those are the problems we got to work on now.
Yeah.
Well, and the first, not to make this about gender, but I just read yesterday she was also the first astronaut to lead the space station, but now she's going to be the first woman on the moon. They're thinking 2025. I'm like, she needs to have something welded on her.
100%.
Meaning like somewhere on her person. I found it interesting though, because the article, I think was New York Times, and it was, she'll be wearing a Prada spacesuit. And I was trying to unpack it to be like, I'm proud because she's a first. I want to see her as a one of many, but she needs to have the credit of being like, man, you went through a lot to get here, so good on you. But then I was like, wait, the emphasis is talking about her Prada spacesuit?
Right.
She's gone through what? And she's got multiple degrees, PhD, all the things, and now we're going to focus on her Prada spacesuit. Welcome to the challenges women face.
Right.
The end. I'm just going to land that on you and say, when you are that 2 of 100, she's probably just doing the taking deep breaths and then talking as an expert and then doing her thing, but that's the challenges she faces. So
100%.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Any questions, Gareth?
Yeah, there's
you
a
were
lot.
so quiet.
Well, I wasn't going to interrupt. There's a lot to follow up on here. I wanted to talk about the welding varsity T-shirt that you brought us.
Varsity welding, yes.
Yeah, talk more about that. What's been the reaction? Because you said you
Yeah, we
handed this
kind
out
of hinted at it. It kind of took the internet by storm, to at least LinkedIn, which seems to be my social of choice. At least people listen to me and my crazy there. I posted that manifesto I was talking to you earlier about, of the story of Nate and all of the other instructors in my generation, which I'll just generalize to Gen X weld instructors, who were most likely told, you're going to do auto shop or jail. I mean, I just can't even fathom that myself, but I was just put into you need to do the college, whereas the Nates of the world were told, it's this or else, this is kind of what you're good at. And so it wasn't in an empowered way. And so I meet those instructors all the time, and I understand the burnout of that if you've never been empowered. And now the next generation, how are we expecting them to learn any differently when their generation of instructors was never given positive feedback? So I always tell Nate, I'm like, you're a varsity squad, you're the varsity welder, so why don't we go put this out there? And so I put that out in a LinkedIn post about a month and a half or 2 months ago. It got all this traction. All these people were like, yes, I need one for my kid. They're in a welding program. And so I literally had no site, and it was on Venmo. And people were like Venmoing me money just to cover the cost. I'm not trying to make money on it. And now it's morphed into, it is on my website. You can get one. I just sent 60 to Alexandra High School, to Josh, because I want every kid to think, you picked the varsity squad. Varsity welding needs to be what we talk about. There needs to be a positivity movement in welding. And these kids need to know it's not, a narrative is big with me in words. It's not alternative. You picked the primary path for you. College is great. I'm not saying college is never. We're not saying go this route and forget college forever. If anything, these companies are willing to put you through college at some point, if that's part of your leadership journey or your welding journey. But they need to be told they're a varsity squad. The end, just like the football team. So it's kind of picked up, but my goal is, if people pay for a shirt, I'm able to, just like Tom's shoes, I can give shirts to kids at welding schools.
Yeah.
Nate and I talk a lot about winning with a torch. And so we just want more people, whatever age, to win with a torch, because even if they don't become a welder, they're going to go talk about it with someone who might.
Yeah, I had an instructor once who his big thing was he wanted, and he was incredible, one of the best instructors I've ever had, but he wanted to talk theory so much right away, and my thing
That'll
was
lose
like,
Gen Z.
yeah, I'm like, let them get out in the shop
Yeah.
and like at least like break it up. Like what he's saying is fantastic, and it makes a lot of different things make sense when you're behind the torch. But if you're going to keep them in a classroom and you just talk for 4 hours about
I don't want to sit in that class.
no,
Do you?
No.
Yeah, like that's
it's almost
the
like
worst.
it was one of those. This is how I've always done it, kind of things. But the information was invaluable, and I'm a geek, so I was loving it. But also, there's other people who just want to like they're not going to get it until they get in there and they strike an arc.
Well, I think that's for educators too, is effectively, I don't know if Nate talked about the story, but our August class, this past class cohort for our Goodwill 5-day Weld Science Lab, we had 2 18-year-olds in the room. I mean, it was multi-generational. So we were like, all right, is this going to cover all the bases of how people learn? The 2 18-year-olds were like at their own table. We paired everyone up so they could kind of be accountability partners. And they were building these like Beetlejuice towers out of 1/8-inch plates while everybody else was just running their beads that were kind of like following within the coloring book lines. They're fearless. And then also we went over and we looked at their welds. We're like, that's actually not bad. They're not blowing holes through stuff. I mean, they were using some thin materials, but they were getting so creative. And I think that is what we're kind of losing with Gen Z. Maybe that's because I have 18 and 20-year-old daughters, is I try to shut up and listen and say, okay, they don't know everything. They're not emotionally intelligent yet necessarily, but they're the ones that can assimilate and fix things for us thanks to those phones and digital lives they've lived their whole life. So let's let them explore. Maybe they're going to teach us a different way to get the same end result or fusion or do that project.
Yeah.
So I think if we have more openness to that, our schools are going to change too.
Yeah. We do. My wife and I do welding workshops in Detroit, and we had a class, was it 2 years ago? And it was actually an old friend of mine brought his daughters and I think his brother-in-law and his dad, and it was awesome. But his 2 daughters were in that age group, like the high school kind of age group, and we went through all the basics, and they liked it. But then we got to where like everyone was running beads to see how they were doing, and I'm like, do you guys want to put something together? So basically, we just brought a bunch of junk parts out. And they picked out how they wanted to go, and I would either show them how to do it or they would be able to do it themselves. But they came out with a little spring dog, like a, like a dash hound or something. And man, their eyes were so bright, and their dad was like, "Oh man, they had a blast. That was so cool."
One, how much freedom do they really get? I mean, we're seeing that in the school systems too. My daughter's included in high school, of just being like, why are we doing the same? That whole
Smashing
definition of
square
insanity.
pegs into
Yeah,
round
like
holes.
we're doing the same thing every day and expecting different results.
Yep.
It's like post-COVID even, we're still going back to the textbooks that are 50 years old when they learned this whole online learning, and now you're just expecting them to go back to the way it was. So it's just interesting to watch. But I always look at it again as opportunity. Okay, that's the way it is, but now pay attention. Pay attention to what they're doing, and now kind of feed into that, and maybe that becomes something.
That's where you go to the next level as an instructor, is being able to take feedback from your students, whether it's them actually telling you something or just watching what they're doing. I agree completely. And that's another thing, as we open up, as we have more high school trade schools, maybe even junior high, we need more competent instructors too. And that's going to come from better training in the first place.
Right. It's aging out. I hear all these statistics of aging out. And again, it's just more of nothing drives me crazier than on LinkedIn when I see people just say a stat. And then you're like, okay, what do you want? What do you want us to do with that? Like, the trades are dead, or we need blank amount of welders, or everybody's aging out. Thank you. I mean, that's a captain obvious to me. So it's more of like, are you trying to get dialogue around that, or what's your solution? And you're trying to challenge us with, do we have our own? Is just go one step beyond that and ask what you're asking, of like, okay, so let's start having a dialogue of, our instructors are aging out and they're burning out at a higher rate than anyone else. I think any industry, and I'm super generalizing there and going on a limb, but the ones that I talk to they're tired.
Yeah.
Or they're like, but then there's that flip side of them. I was just at Pensacola State College, and I see, and I'm interested if you see it too, these instructors that are semi-retired, they're still keeping their gig going if they're running their welding shop, and they've taken less time, and they're like, I don't need the overtime anymore. I'm not gunning for that thing, and I love teaching students. And so I don't know. So that's me landing it on you all in this audience of saying like, wow, I'm newly exposed to this with some instructors who are in their 50s and 60s. They're not really retiring, but at some point they are going to age out. But what do we do with that energy too? And how do we more encompass that of saying, hey, these ones that are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, maybe you do only want to work that 20-hour week, but then you want to feed into the next generation and teach, because that feeds your soul, right? So just look at your recruiting of teachers differently.
Yeah, and as far as the workforce itself, I'm a big geek with the stats on that stuff, and I don't think we're aging out. People are working longer. The fastest growing age group is 65 and up, just because they can't afford to retire. Right. The average age of a welder is like 44, but the instructor thing, that's a different story.
Yeah.
And I have seen I've got some friends like Scott Robbie, who basically just started his own school in Texas and is doing everything the right way. And I hope more people look at how he's doing things than the typical, I've got a classroom and I got a lab. He's building simulators outside, so people are welding pipe underneath of it in the mud.
Oh, it's
and
great.
Simulating rain.
Get him off the plates. Get him off the plates.
And he's doing it with empathy. He takes care of his students. He takes care of his staff. And I hope more look at that model as opposed to other schools I could name, where it's just hey, you graduate here, you're going to make $100,000 right away, and just tricking kids into and then it's $40,000 to go to school there or whatever. And tricking kids into thinking they're going to make that, when in reality you're probably going to start at 30 to 40 grand, and most welders get up to about 60, 65, and if you're exceptional you can get six figures and above. But there's a big part of being honest with the students, and a lot of that is in the instruction too.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about. Transparency goes a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you saw my eye roll. I have no poker face. That is, my corporate me has always been told in reviews, you got to work on the poker face. Now, 47-year-old me is I love my non-poker face, because I will tell you how I feel about it in a hopefully constructive way. But that drives me nuts when I see the Instagrams and where the kids are watching of saying, you would make $20 an hour. You would make $28 off of one or two welds. I mean, I guess it's a point of view, but it does set this tone of this is the expectation, and you could be this versus some other industry title, when we really do need to unpack it of, just like any other industry, yes, you could make six figures, multiple six figures, but in any industry, that takes a significant amount of work.
You're making a lot of sacrifices.
It's not a 20-hour work week.
Yeah.
So if you do want that 20-hour work week and to travel and Instagram, no judgment zone, that's awesome. That's a lifestyle choice. That's probably not the six-figure job. But if you're willing to hoof it, and that's what I tell Nate, because he's got 18 different gigs going, and now he's in bucket, he's into tractors, and he's grading, and but he's also doing jobs for people in those things. He's not just going and being ping, buying this, ping, buying that.
He's
earned everything, and he works his tail off. So there's multiple examples I could give of that, where I want them to aspirationally look at people, and I tell him all the time, I'm you need to say all the work you're doing to get all the stuff that you're showing, because I think that's important too for kids. One, you can get all that stuff. 1,000,000% you can. But also it's what's the work ethic and how hard do you want to work at it?
He's should I drive my Porsche to school when I'm doing these? I'm hell yeah,
yes,
you should.
Yes.
Let everybody know, they see what you do on Instagram, and you're going to those classes and you're putting in that same work.
Yeah.
Let them know it's there.
Well, and I hope I don't get roasted on the socials on this one, but he and I talk about this a lot, and it's gotten into a bigger community of, I want to honor the people who say they are in the blue collar community. I don't want to take away from the pride factor of saying blue collar, but we distanced ourselves in the early 2000s when it was blue collar and white collar. I will tell you, because of my own daughters and their friends, and now the kind of Gen Zers and Gen Alphas I expose myself to be around and listen to, they don't know either one of those.
Right.
They know a gray collar. They know a hoodie. So if we keep kind of relying on either one of those monikers when we're talking to those generations, that's a bit of a challenge. They don't identify with that unless they were in more of that ag community. That blue collar does mean something to them. I will tell you, white collar means absolutely nothing to kids. They're like, what? So I try to challenge people to say, honor that, but also don't make that necessarily your platform as you're trying to get to Gen Z. Make it more of, you can have a Porsche if that's what you want. I got it. Show it to them. But then also say, in this gray hoodie, gray collar, upcoming generation, they can go to anything they want to do. Go be a doctor. Go be a lawyer. Go be a welder. But that status level is just the same of getting a Porsche, getting, rig trucks, whatever your aspirational thing is, travel the world. if you work hard.
Yeah, don't judge that book by the cover. Especially this show. Walking around, you couldn't, I mean, people look like they may be out on the shop floor and actually may be running the whole shop.
Exactly. I love
nowadays.
that.
People that
I
look
love
like
that
they're
about
homeless
welding.
like me might actually be competent and show up to work every day.
Well, and let's face it, those people are usually the CEOs you want to know.
Yeah.
I will say, I grew up in D.R. Horton, give him a lot of love because I spent 15 years there. And D.R. himself, he just passed away last year, drove a beat-up Chevy Silverado his whole life. He traveled with his own boxed wine to all of the cities and divisions, and he stayed in Hampton
boxed
Inn.
wine?
Boxed wine, that Franzia
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh, I
He
know.
loved it. He loved to eat it Outback. And this is not a secret to anyone that works at D.R. Horton, by the way. And I say this all with love because he taught me about saying he loved real estate. He loved to sniff dirt and go buy real estate all day long, just like some of these other Warren Buffett kind of stories. But those are the CEOs. He would be walking the show floor and flying commercial.
Yeah.
You would never know he's a billionaire.
Right.
Those are the people you want to meet, right?
Yeah,
Is those
no.
totally chill,
Yeah.
humble, not, like puffing
Right, yeah.
themselves up.
Humility
And
goes a long way.
I think there's a lot of them here and then also in
Yeah.
welding. But so there's that fine balance of saying, show the kids what you can make through what
Yeah.
you do, but then also having that humility level of saying, like, you're going to have so much more legacy if you just do every day. Come in
All
and
right.
work.
You got a lot of wisdom, Demi. There's no doubt there.
I love it.
Where can they find out more about you and your efforts?
I always tell people, if you want to have a one-on-one dialogue with me, you can go to my new website, thanks to Marketing Metal, plug for Marketing Metal. Although she's very busy right now. She's like,
Yeah.
I got all these intro calls. So I said, all right, you're doing your due. But go to DemiKnightClark.com. You can find me there. Or I love LinkedIn. That's kind of my place to really connect with people one-on-one, because I think I'm teaching the next generation that get on LinkedIn at 16.
Mm-hmm.
And there are welders on LinkedIn all day long. They comment on my stuff constantly. And I love to kill that paradigm with people. And then I'm at Girl Friday's Garage on Instagram.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for
It's
having
been a
me.
treat.
And listening to my crazy.
We love crazy.
No. It's a good. The ultimate goal is just to get people aware and involved. I think that's a plus. I need more people like y'all to keep me energized, just because I think I have like 1/100th the energy you do. On that note, send us a note.
Send us a note.
At podcast at fmamfg.org. Be sure to tell your friends and family, enemies, strangers about the FMA Fabricator Podcast and FMA Podcast Network. Thank you, Demi.
Thank you very
Josh.
much.
Thanks for having me.
Goodbye.
The Fabricator Podcast is a production of Fabricators and Manufacturers Association, located in Elgin, Illinois. The show is hosted by Dan Davis and the staff of FMA Communications. The podcast is produced by Gareth Slager and recorded and edited by Griffin Hammond and Dana Weicker. Sales support provided by Andy Flando. Additional production support by Elizabeth Gavin, Mike Owens, Billy Culpa, Pat Simon, Brandon Geyer, and me, Sarah Spring. Email us at podcast@fmamfg.org. Thank you for listening.